Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. So there's this story by horror writer Junji Ito called The Enigma of Amigara Fault. Probably one of his more popular stories next to maybe Uzumaki. Even became a meme at some point. It's a great yet horrifying story centered around mysterious holes appearing on the side of a mountain. And long story short, without spoiling too much, a compulsion begins to grow within the people to quote-unquote find their hole. Again, scary stuff. And I wanted to make a game inspired by this concept, but you know, with a wholesome twist. How exactly? Well, before we get into that, remember to leave a like if you enjoy the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future game dev videos, and with that said, let's see how I turned horror wholesome. Obviously, the first step is to make the graphics cute. So here's the same concept seen in Amigara, only done up in a cute aesthetic. And the goal of the game is the same, find the hole that fits the player's shape. Simple in execution, but with quite a bit still being done behind the scenes. The first thing to note is the player itself. Our player is in fact not an object, instead a simple struct full of variables that one would expect a player object to use. In fact, nothing quote-unquote physical in the world is an object. The player sprite is also not just an image. Instead, it's generated using a surface and a cutout style method to produce the player's target shape and the rainbow gradient's direction. Basically, a rainbow gradient is rotated to a random angle and then the shape is cut out from that image. Meaning that technically there are at least 1080 different character variations that can be generated using this system. So when the player spawns, a random tile is designated as their tile. It is then stored in the player's struct as an array for future reference. For example, those coordinates are then used to set that lone tile to match the player's shape, while the rest randomly display another shape or nothing at all. The player can also press/hold spacebar while scouring the play area to confirm their hole. This will check the player's position, and if the player has in fact found their hole, the game switches to the game over state. The game over state itself is pretty basic. The player's sprite is squished to emulate dropping into the hole, and a text card is displayed. The text featured includes the time it took to find the hole, how many hints were used, and how many holes have been found this session. There are also prompts to continue searching for more holes or close the game. And indeed, in order to make the experience of finding one's hole slightly easier, players can find hint coins scattered across the play area. Now, as mentioned earlier, nothing physical in the game's world actually exists. So these coins are also just a bunch of values and a sprite stored in an array, and are also only meant to spawn on blank tiles in order to avoid obscuring the holes themselves. So because our player and coins don't physically exist, distance checks are made to determine a quote-unquote collision. And when such collision exists, several functions are then triggered. The first being a function to remove the coin's entry from the game. The next function adds a guide marker to the game, and finally a bit of screen shake to provide visual feedback for activating the coin. The guide marker added is just an array of data for X and Y positions and a timer value. And these values are used to spawn a particle trail that flows in the direction of the chosen hole tile. And the particle itself is nothing fancy, just a simple colored pixel particle with some wobbles. And you know, looking back at the project now, perhaps it's not as wholesome as expected. Granted, the motivation behind finding a hole is flipped, but still, the character's only existence is to spawn in a world devoid of other life, find a hole that matches their shape, climb into said hole, and do it all over again. And fun fact, this was originally going to be a lot darker, both literally and figuratively. Originally, the concept was the player was a light source, which constantly drained. The lower their light level, the more engulfed in darkness the player would become. The world was also monochrome and much more desolate. There was also another mode I ended up cutting, which basically turned the experience into a stressful mess of panic and chaos. So on one hand, the concept may not exactly be as wholesome as one would think. On the other, man, it could have been so much worse. But don't just take my word for it. Determine just how wholesome this experience feels by playing it for yourself. That's right, Gold and higher tier patrons can now download this game as one of the many perks of being subscribed to my Patreon. So if you would like to get early access to videos and downloads to this and previous exclusive releases, such as my take on the Backrooms, a link to my Patreon can be found in the description. And regardless of whether you take the plunge or not, I'd love to know what you thought of this project. Too wholesome? Not wholesome enough? Leave any and all thoughts in the comments. And with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.